Good evening, and thank you for being here. I'm Ryan Davis, Executive Director of KQED Live, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our first event of the winter season here in the Commons at KQED's headquarters in San Francisco. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, KQED is Northern California's PBS and NPR member station, and your source for local public media in the Bay Area. KQED Live is our new multi-platform live events program that takes KQED's mission to inform, inspire, and involve, and makes it tangible through vivid conversations like tonight's, screenings, performance and storytelling, and much more here in person and live streaming online at youtube.com/KQED Live. You can learn more about our events and get tickets at kqed.org/live. And we want to thank the season sponsors that make KQED Live possible: Asian Art Museum, Berkeley Repertory Theater, Comcast Business, and Oakland International Airport. We are so grateful to them for their commitment for supporting our mission of civic and cultural engagement here in the Bay Area. We want to thank all of you for being with us tonight and for engaging with us on KQED radio at 88.5 FM or on TV at KQED 9 or streaming live online tonight. If we bring value to your life every day, we want to encourage you to become a KQED member, and you can find out more about how to do that at kqed.org/donate. So this space is dedicated to exercising civic imagination and clarifying our responsibilities to the common good. And there's no more urgent matter affecting the common good than our changing climate. KQED climate reporters have been hard at work covering what Bay Area climate leaders are doing to address the sea level rise, air pollution, ocean warming, and wildfire. And it's long been a desire of ours to bring solutions-based information to you, the public, and make it easy for you to plug in and take part and act for our common future. So with that, please join me in welcoming to the stage our host this evening, journalist Laura Klivans, to discuss what you can do about climate change.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks so much. All right. Hello and welcome. My name is Laura Klivans. I'm a climate reporter here at KQED in San Francisco, and I'm also the host of a show that looks into the beauty of all things very small in nature called Deep Look. As public media, one of our missions is really focused on community. And what we're doing here is we're creating a space for our community to have conversations about issues that really matter to us. And there's no issue that matters quite so much to many of us as our changing climate. Another thing that's super powerful about community and climate change is that because the issue is just so large, we need to be in community to work on this issue together and to seek solutions together. So while many of us cannot be here in person tonight, I do want to assure you that we have a lot of people who are watching this along with you, and we appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much for making this happen. So a quick overview of the evening, and I'm going to sit down because if you haven't noticed, I am kind of large at the moment. So here is what our evening will entail. We're going to start out and we're going to do an exercise taking you through some ideas about where you can plug into climate change and climate action. Then we're going to bring up Brit Ray to talk about eco-anxiety. We'll next move to Priya Shukla, who will talk about individual and collective actions that we can take. We'll talk then with Violet Wulf-Saena, who will take us through some community resilience and adaptation strategies. And then we'll finally wrap up. We'll revisit this idea about where you can actually start. What we really set out to do with this evening was to show you the beginning of your climate journey trail, right? We want to deliver you to a trailhead, and you can move from there. Your climate journey will be long. You'll probably move from your original climate home and end up in another place entirely, maybe. But we want to give you the tools to really feel empowered to start. So I want to show you this graphic. It's called Global Warming's Six Americas. And it's from the Yale Program on Climate Communication, which is a very cool thing. What it shows us is that there is more than just the folks who are in the climate denial or climate change exists camps. There's a real spectrum of where people are relating to climate change. So on one side, we see alarmed and concerned, and those are people who are extremely worried about climate change and generally ready to act. As we move along the spectrum, we move to people who feel less that way. The reason I want to show you this is because the majority of people in our country actually fall into the two categories on the left side of the screen, alarmed and concerned. I want to bring this up because most of the people that we are surrounding ourselves with are concerned about climate change. We might not know it because climate change is still pretty taboo to talk about. And it's also shown that people would like to talk about it more. So I want you to know that as you are experiencing climate change, I know that that experience can sometimes feel very individual and very isolating. And I want us to really feel the community who cares about this. All right, so that brings us to our activity. This is the part of the workshop where you grab that pen and paper that we were telling you about, and we're going to do an exercise. For those of you watching online, click a link that should be in the chat right now, and it will take you to a document online where you can see this graphic. It is a Venn diagram, and it is created by the marine biologist Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and the All We Can Save project. It asks you to draw 3 circles. So you can do this on your paper at home. The top circle, you're gonna write down 2 things that bring you joy. So these are things that motivate you. These are things that wake you up in the morning. So some examples might be your kids, skiing, visual art, roller skating, video games, thrifting, you name it. I want you to take a moment and just think of 2 things and write them down. All right. In the next circle, the one on the bottom left, we have things you are good at. So these could be things like writing, coding, building, or logistics. So take a moment and write down 2 things that you are good at. All right, now in the final circle, I'd like you to write down 2 things that you think need doing related to climate change. Now I know this part can be hard to figure out really what needs doing, and that's what we are in part going to talk about tonight. But do your best to take some guesses. I'll give you some examples right now. Lobbying, installing solar panels, talking about climate change more, helping to update housing policies to allow for denser housing. There are many others too, so think about what those things are. I'll give you an example of when I have filled out this Venn diagram. So what brings me joy is actually being together in community. I'm a pretty extroverted person, so being able to actually be here in this space tonight is very exciting for me. Things I'm good at are interviewing people, having conversations with people, and what work I think needs doing is that I do think that we need more spaces to talk about climate change and process climate change together. So voila, when I put all those circles together, what I find is what I should do. And that's hosting a climate change event at KQED. How funny. Okay. So anyway, so that is very exciting that that is finally happening. All right. So we're going to come back to this exercise at the end, and we're going to have you share out some of your ideas about where you're going to plug into climate change action at the end. But hold those for right now, because I want to give you just a quick review of the science so we're starting on the same page, and then we'll bring out our wonderful guests. All right, so climate change is here, as you know, and it is us, humans. We have created this. The world has already warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius, that's around 2 degrees Fahrenheit, since the 1800s, and the effects will worsen for a while. And that's a really hard pill to swallow. Climate change is also an equity issue. it affects the people who are contributing to it the least. So people of color, indigenous people, and low-income people are seeing the worst effects presently. But there is hope. This chart shows us that our best bet is to take aggressive and rapid action to reduce the emissions that we create. We need to start now. Ideally, we would limit our warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's 2.8 degrees Fahrenheit. That is actually something that scientists say is feasible. However, what is up to the rest of us as a society is whether we are ready for that to happen. It would require unprecedented coordination on the local level on up. But this chart shows us our choices. One, if we were to have no emissions cuts, as you see with the orange line, would be catastrophic. Another, if we have emissions cuts on a rapid rate, the blue line, that would be livable. And if we could actually do this thing, this Herculean thing that we are being called to do in our lifetimes, and hold ourselves as close to that blue line as possible, that'd be awesome. Let's make that future happen. Now, even if we do not meet these goals, if we don't meet 1.5 degrees, which some might say is very likely, there's no end of the world point where you give up. Every 10th of a degree will make a difference. And the issue is just so enormous that the benefit of that is that it requires all of us to pitch in to make a difference. And because the issue is so big, we can all pitch in various ways that we are actually bringing out all of our strengths and the things that we are passionate about. So I'm not saying, if you're somebody who loves thrifting, you don't have to become a climate scientist. What we're saying is that there are ways to pitch in using your strengths. All right, so now you are likely feeling some uncomfortable emotions after looking at some of that science. And that is why I'm really excited to bring up to the stage Brit Ray, who's going to help us talk about those feelings. All right, Britt, come on out. You're welcome. All right, so Brit Ray is a human and planetary health fellow at Stanford University and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, as well as the author of Gen Dread, a newsletter about coping with the psychological toll of climate change, and I highly recommend it. All right, thank you. I'll see you in a bit.
Okay, I'll scooch in here in this comfy chair. Good evening, everyone. Nice to be here. Let's get these slides going. Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk about why attending to the climate within is important in terms of how we can then address the climate outside of us, the global climate crisis. Because, let's face it, many people are feeling extremely distressed by what is happening to the ecosystems that we depend on, as well as fed up or enraged by the moral bankruptcy of failed leadership around the climate crisis that we've been dealing with for decades, and are struggling to cope with the uncertainty that this emergency has caused around where we are headed as a species. And this distress has different forms and different names. You might have heard of climate anxiety or ecological grief, two of the big ones. And these emotions can be practical when they get us to notice the problem, reassess our lives, and take actions that can help to reduce the threat. But they can also become harmful if they burden us with chronic stress and overwhelm that impairs our daily functioning, or lead us to a philosophical place of doomism, basically the belief that actions don't matter anymore because it's all too late, so we might as well just party until the ship that we're all on sinks. We need to be careful about how these feelings are tended to, because as Susie Moser so aptly puts it in the climate anthology, All We Can Save, burnt out people are not equipped to serve a burning planet. I am not a therapist, but I am a climate and mental health researcher. And I write a newsletter that shares coping tools based on the research that I've done over the last 5 years for my forthcoming book on these topics. And broadly speaking, I've noticed that there are 5 things that a person can do to help themselves work with the challenging climate emotions that are arising in society in ways that are positive both for them and the planet. So firstly, The leading climate-aware therapist, Caroline Hickman, says that activism comes in two forms. There's external activism. This is the kind that you recognize on the streets and in our political systems and riddled throughout our social struggles. And then there's internal activism, the emotional work that happens inside of us. Now, while the climate crisis demands that we produce a lot of external action and fast, it also increasingly demands that we do deep inner work to build up our emotional and psychological strength, our resilience for living in dangerous times. Acknowledging this is an important first step. Secondly, it really helps to recognize the rationality of these emotions. Climate anxiety, for instance, is nothing to pathologize. It's not a medical disorder that you can get from a psychiatrist. And being distressed about what's happening is completely reasonable given the threats that we face. Feeling disturbed by the climate crisis and the injustices that it enforces is a sign of one's compassion and ability to care. We can feel proud of this distress. It's a sign of our humanity. The question is, how can we live well with it, not get overwhelmed by the feelings, and find ways ultimately to harness them to help us bring about a better future than the one that the status quo is currently tying us to? Now, thirdly, in order to harness these feelings, it's really important that we find others who get it, who we can talk to. This means finding people who can mirror our concerns, who legitimize and validate them, and who give permission to the feelings, never shaming us as though we're being overdramatic or acting out of their own denial in a protective way to say that there's something wrong with us for feeling this way. Just stepping out of isolation and into community with others who we can talk about these feelings can be massively relieving for a lot of people who otherwise sit alienated in the distress. Now, new tools and programs are cropping up all the time for doing this emotional containment work. A few that you could check out are climate cafes. You can just look it up on the internet, and they're a decentralized type of emotional meeting that is cropping up in different cities around the world for having these kinds of conversations. There's also Climate Awakening, a virtual drop-in series for exactly this same purpose. And then there's what are called emotional methodologies, which are programs, step-like processes that are contained in group work, like the Good Grief Network or the work that reconnects, that really guide people through a process of grieving and feeling their feelings in order to ultimately reinvest all that emotional energy into actions that matter. And then, as I mentioned earlier, climate-aware therapy is now a burgeoning new space. Mental health professionals are finding ways to harness their skills and talents towards helping the climate-distressed folks among us live better with their awareness, as well as those suffering from direct climate trauma with disasters, for example, get through and heal. Fourthly, it's really important that we also all understand our own coping strategies that can help us self-soothe. This can be massively beneficial when we learn how to expand our windows of tolerance for dealing with traumatic events, for witnessing struggles vicariously on the behalf of others, for example. All things that the climate crisis presents us with that we have to deal with. So I'm talking about strategies for lessening anxiety, like meditation and mindfulness, forest bathing, exercise, cooking perhaps, if that's what works for you. Things that actually calm the nervous system and bring one's higher order thinking back online so that we're able to respond thoughtfully to the moment rather than react because we're hypervigilant and stressed, otherwise wound up. Lastly, the fifth step is where all of this emotional processing and coming together with others can really lead to, and that's tapping into the emotions as super fuel to propel meaningful external activism and systems change, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. By coming together with others to strategize about the creative ways that we can push for making these shifts in our profession, in our personal lifestyles, in our families, in our communities, the dynamics at play here can help any climate-concerned person live then closer in alignment with their values, which can make a person feel really good because existentially meaningful work and change feels good, inherently and intrinsically. And all of this, aside from just helping us feel emotionally better as individuals, then of course helps us adapt to and build out the better future that we want. So with that, I'm going to bring Laura back out here to introduce our next guest, Priya, and I'll see you again at the end of these talks.
Thanks so much, Britt. Great. And just so you all know, the slides will be available after this, so you don't need to copiously take notes. All right. Next up, we have Priya Shukla. She's a PhD candidate at UC Davis in Ted Groschholt's lab, studying how climate change affects shellfish aquaculture operations within the coastal ocean. She is currently a contributor of Forbes, come on over, and writing about ocean and climate science. Priya is a California Sea Grant Graduate Research Fellow, studying how to improve oyster survival in the face of climate change, and a National Science Foundation research trainee in the Sustainable Oceans Program at UC Davis. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's
All
my
right.
pleasure.
Okay, take it away.
All right, great. Thank you. It is my absolute joy to sit with you all today and think about exactly what Britt left us with, which is how do we take those emotions and channel that into something actionable. So I'm going to be talking about this in two different sort of lanes. One is a systemic, bigger picture way, which is really the way that we can see tractable climate action happen. And then, of course, the more individual path, which is what we can do together, but also apart. So I'm first going to start with this idea of systemic change. And again, this is the stuff that oftentimes feels like it is out of our control, but just in the same way that casting your individual vote eventually contributes in an election result, you can do things that can, in fact, result in large-scale change. So that can start with getting involved in your school district. Whether or not you have children, school boards right now are a place of action and change. And just right now where we're seeing that books are getting banned, years ago we saw that books that affected the lumber industry, like the Lorax, also got banned. So there's certainly a venue to be talking about climate action in schools. And then, of course, reducing community food waste. And you might think that that's not necessarily related, but in fact, 6% of global greenhouse gas emissions are a result of wasted food. So if you can work with your local grocery stores to, in fact, transition edible or organic waste away from a landfill towards people in need, that is a great place to start. There's also thinking about where we live. So many of us who are part of this moment right now trying to figure out where we can actually make change are very privileged in that we probably have a roof over our heads and a place that we call home. And so we can work to make those homes, not just our own, but those that are part of our community, also more resilient to climate change. And so if you're a renter, you're certainly more vulnerable, and so that's a harder conversation. But I encourage thinking about ways that you can save your landlord some money and help their bottom line. So for example, if your landlord pays for water, then talk about getting rain barrels as a means of both saving water inside units, but also maybe watering some of the landscape around the unit. And then if you are part of a homeowners association because you live in the Bay Area and manage to make an income where you can afford a house here these days, it's a great opportunity to actually talk to your HOA about figuring out ways to install solar panels, which can be very controversial for reasons I'm not going to get into now. But being part of that action at the community level can be really beneficial. And then I think one thing that we don't think about that's in our own backyard is this opportunity to actually protect natural carbon sinks. You might think, oh, there's no tropical rainforest here. But in fact, we have something that is a lot stronger and better in some ways, and those are wetlands. And so protecting the wetlands that we have here that can actually absorb carbon into their sediments is a great way to also stave off further climate change impacts. And then if you've lived in the Bay Area for a while, or like me, your entire life, you are all too familiar with the traffic situation that we have to deal with here. And so thinking about transitioning into a community where we have a lot more public transit. If you've ever driven down Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, it is a pain. But that is actually the point, to reduce the amount of cars on that street and improve the number of people walking or biking. And then finally, when we're thinking about this bigger picture level of things, putting the action in climate action plans. A lot of businesses, universities, cities have climate action plans where they'll say things like, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050, but actually haven't really listed any mechanisms. So thinking about how you can actually help your community get to that goal is really important. What is that how? And overall, just thinking about the fact that the San Francisco Bay Area is a pretty dynamic community. So what sort of large-scale things that we can see in policy can we actually enact to benefit everyone, right? A rising tide lifts all boats. How can we put that philosophy into our climate actions? And so to give you some inspiration for this, I want to show you this photo of Amsterdam, where in 1982, they were affected by the fossil fuel crisis. And so they decided to convert their entire city away from things that need fuel. And so you can see this road was actually converted into a park for people. How do we make our community more people forward? It's basically a great way to frame this systemic change. And so when I'm talking about systems change, you're probably thinking like, there's so much to do and I don't even know where to start. So let me help you with that. There are things that you can in fact do inside your own house that will basically be a drop of water in the bucket, but you still need every drop of water to fill that bucket, right? And so the first thing I'm gonna bring up, you've probably heard already, is a plant-forward diet. I'm not asking you to become vegetarian or vegan. What I'm telling you is to stop consuming things as frequently that are in fact part of our planet's larger carbon footprint. The next thing I'm gonna say is travel more slowly. I'm not saying stop flying, stop driving. I'm saying think about ways where you can actually slow down your commute so that you aren't directly putting more emissions into the atmosphere. This is specifically to my husband. You can go at 60 miles per hour on the freeway. You do not need to go faster than that. But maybe that applies to some of you as well. And then I'll also say, don't buy new if you don't have to. A lot of communities now have buy nothing groups, for example, where people gift each other things that they no longer need. But by staying away from new clothing or new contraptions, you are actually helping reduce the amount of fossil fuels being emitted into the atmosphere. And then if you happen to have a garden that you have control over, something that a lot of people may not be aware of is that having grass is actually a huge sponge for water. And in a drought-tolerant state like, or in a drought-laden state like ours, you want things that aren't sucking up water. You want those drought-tolerant plants. Or you want to have plants that actually attract things like pollinators, like hummingbirds or bats or bees, that will also enhance our wildlife in this area. And then, of course, you don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? There are so many organizations that are already doing this work, and so you can just get on the ground floor with them. You don't need to think about where to start because they've already started laying the path forward for you. And then the last thing I'm gonna leave you with is basically what Britt was sharing with us, which is that it's important to also process your emotions, because by doing that, you will be able to figure out where you fit in. You'll be able to flesh out parts of that Venn diagram that Laura shared with us. And I want to remind you that it is in fact a privilege to be able to even think about where to start. And so what are you willing to change about the way you live your life so that people who don't have that privilege can benefit from the actions that you're making, whether or not you will ever get a chance to interact with them? So I'm gonna leave you with this image of what it might look like for every teenager to potentially have an electric bike in their future. And so with that, I'm gonna thank you all, and I'm gonna go ahead and pass the mic to Laura to introduce Violet, who will hopefully help you show what some of this looks like in practice.
Great. Thank you so much, Priya. All right. Our next speaker is Violet Wulf-Saena, and she has served as an international climate change expert for over 10 years, being sought after to work with various groups in a wide range of less developed countries to protect their communities from the impacts of climate change. Violet's dedication to elevating community leadership and response to environmental justice is rooted from her lived experiences in the South Pacific. She works in partnership with the government sector, research institutions, and community-based organizations to build community capacity to respond to climate change and sea level rise. Violet is currently the Director of Climate Resilient Communities. Welcome, Violet.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be here today to share some of the work that my organization are doing on the ground in the communities that we serve. Climate resilient communities. Climate Resilient Communities is a community-based organization working hand in hand, side by side with communities that we serve to identify vulnerabilities to climate change, as well as prioritizing adaptation strategies to respond to their vulnerabilities. I founded the organization in 2019 because of the need to focus on communities, the need to focus on prioritizing adaptation strategies that communities prioritized. And many times many researchers, even planners, we always get ourselves involved with climate adaptation assessment, which only ended up in reports, but no tangible projects. The main goal of my organization is to make those projects a reality, because communities are tired of providing information to planners, researchers, whoever comes their way to assess their vulnerabilities, and in the end, nothing happens, they live with their reports, and the communities are still in danger. So through the 3 core programs that we have, community-based adaptation, that's where we work directly with community leaders through the existing infrastructures to identify vulnerabilities as well as priorities. Our Resilient Home programs, this is a program where we work directly with households that are vulnerable, households that are under-resourced. And what we try to do with this program is to help families access services and programs that were developed by our states and government to assess low-income families, to assess these services. And of course, climate action education, this is where we do a lot of capacity building, education, awareness, providing hands-on experience to our youth as well as our elders in the communities that we serve. We work in East Palo Alto, Bellhaven of Menlo Park, and North Fair Oaks in San Mateo County. So what are our methods? As I have mentioned many times, adaptation or actions developed to address climate change may not happen in life. It only happens in reports. And so for us to overcome this barrier is our commitment to the communities. We also tried our best in many times to build that trust before we even get to the other steps of assessing community priorities and vulnerabilities. So through our inclusive resilience strategies, what we do there is we build climate change community teams to ensure that community residents and leaders are engaged in the conversation, to also ensure that they are at the table, that they are equipped to voice concerns of the communities. So that's why we build climate change teams throughout the communities that we serve. And of course, the data is also still very important. So that's why we do community needs assessment. But mind you, these are all community-led. These are all community-led, and most of the work we do it with guidance and blessings from the community leaders. And of course, it's very important that we build partnerships. Climate change, it's a big burden to bear for anybody, for any city, for any country. That's why we have the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That's why we have a lot of regional collaboration. And the reason so that everyone is not being left out. And that's why it's important for our work to also build collaboration and partnership, because that's the only best way that we can serve the most vulnerable, the frontline communities, and the under-resourced communities. So methods in practice. So for example, to share with you tonight, in East Palo Alto, because in East Palo Alto, a community that is highly vulnerable to flooding, flooding from sea level rise, as well as flooding from intense rainfall. During our community-led vulnerability assessment, the community identified rain gardens and water cisterns as a strategy, a priority strategy or adaptation action to take. CRC, in collaboration with Fresh Approach, High Tide Intelligent, Grassroots Ecology, we, together with the climate change community team, put forward a proposal to build rain gardens, a pilot that is in the pipeline. We will be building 25 rain gardens in East Palo Alto and water cistern systems. Now, the reason why the community prioritized these adaptation strategies is because of their vulnerability to flooding. Rain gardens and water cistern systems will not only help to reduce flood risk, but will also help with food security as well as water securities, which are all issues that are important to the community in East Palo Alto. In North Fair Oaks, our Climate Ready team, together with Stanford researchers in 2019, found that surrounding cities like Atherton, Menlo Park, there is a 10 degrees difference between the temperature. Like, it's always cooler on those sites, but for North Fair Oaks, it's usually very hot, which is why they are vulnerable to extreme heat. So for that community, they prioritize tree planting as a strategy to minimize the impact of heat waves. And that's why we have a project on the ground working with the North Fair Oaks Climate Ready team, as well as Canopy, one of our partner organizations who is leading this effort in North Fair Oaks. So these are two examples of community priority actions that are happening because the community are leading the efforts. And with CRC, we are only supporting and making sure that we are able to seek funding to implement these projects. So for most of our work, we serve frontline communities, communities of color, under-resourced communities, and most of the time, these are the communities that are being left out in the conversation of climate change, left out in policy making. But you are missing the gift here, because working with communities generates solutions for the community goes a long way compared to other actions that are being implemented without community buy-in. There is a greater capacity for communities to organize. It's not just hard solutions, it's not just EVs, electrification. It's a whole lot of network that needs to happen to address the vulnerabilities of these families and these residents, because their vulnerability increases because of their ability to respond to climate change and sea level rise. So that's why we are doing this work with communities. Greater community capacity to learn, and again, as I said, partnerships, collaboration is one of the key formula to the success of community-led work. So what can you do? One, organize. If you have a stronger voice, if you have the resources, if you are a natural leader, step up, organize, look out for those communities that need your voice. Advocate for, the most vulnerable. Advocate for inclusive programs, inclusive adaptation strategies. Support organizations that are doing the work on the ground. Most of the time, our organizations like ours and many others who are working tirelessly to respond to environmental injustice, equity issues, please do support those organizations, because it is a tiring job to look after or to care for other communities. And lastly, I will leave you with this. I know, plant a tree, that's very simple, but to some, that's the only action that they can take to help or assist with climate change. Many of us here in the Bay Area are talking about going EV or electric, purchasing an electric vehicle, electrifying your home. Those are all great actions, and thank you for doing all of those. But for us, many of us who have limited resources, who don't have the time, who works 2 or 3 jobs a day, who worry about displacement, you can plant a tree. It's simple as that. That's the action if you want to take, please do. And I think my time is up, and I will now ask Laura to come back to lead our next session. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Violet. All right, well, I am excited to have you all join us for a question and answer session now. And for those of you who are watching, you can put the questions in the chat, and we'd love to hear from you. All right. Thank you. And I'm just going to start with this question. So I'm wondering if you could all just talk about where you are seeing effective work happening and where people can plug in to make real changes in ways that might seem atypical. Not going out and protesting maybe. I think that's more of a visual, that's a totally great action as well, but that's like one that we see a lot. And so I think folks who are busy, who are working 2 or 3 jobs, who are taking care of a lot of different people at home, they want to know where they can plug into. So who'd like to take that first?
I can start. So it's occurring in amazing ways at all different levels. Of course, we have examples like Violet's amazing organization doing grassroots work with communities most impacted. And then we have people who are finding ways to reorient their professions that they're already doing towards the climate crisis, even though they never first incepted it as being a climate job. So I'm talking about, fund managers finding ways to reorganize their investments so that they're only green. I'm talking about teachers figuring out ways to bring climate into the curriculum that they're already teaching. I'm talking about journalists like you realizing that your stories should be focusing on the climate. Architects who are understanding ways in which they can work with different building materials. And the list really goes on and on. One woman who I'm quite inspired by left her job in the advertising industry. Her name's Christina Reyna. And this was in 2015 after coming to a head with the marketing firm that she worked at because they were serving fossil fuel clients. And ads have been promoting greenwashing and obstruction of truth around the climate crisis. And when you leave, a high-paying position at a place that you're talented to hold that role for, and then decide to do something that aligns with your values, she took her skills and went and started a company focused on social impact filmmaking to tell the truth about the climate crisis and other social justice issues. Then that's a really bold and inspiring trailblazer. And I think that we need many more people like that when they have the privilege to make those kinds of swerves. And I'll leave it there for now, but I'm just excited to see how it's popping up really in any field.
Yeah, I'll add that I have the great privilege of working with oyster growers and specifically the Hog Island Oyster Company, who I've just been totally had my mind blown by their willingness to work with scientists like me who are interested in exploring climate change and thinking about oysters and just aquaculture in general, which means basically farming seafood, as a means of thinking about mitigating climate change. So of course I'm working on oysters, but there are plenty of people who are thinking about putting photosynthetic things in the water to absorb carbon, and that includes things like kelp. And this is all brand new work. We don't know what the potential is, but it's grounds for innovation, doing something that humans have been doing for thousands of years and using it as a tool for change. And then I'll also add, I think some of the things that I've really loved seeing happen is in my own family and friends who are just making hard decisions for themselves, where they're like, I can't be part of Bank of America, for example, anymore because they haven't divested from fossil fuels. And so I'm going to move my money into a different fund where I trust that my money is accruing interest from sources that that help me sleep at night, basically. And I think people making those difficult, not easy choices is actually very inspiring because it's not an easy time to be living in and living through.
I think one thing I'll add, from a community lens, is that some community, neighborhood leaders who are becoming more active, meaning they are leading the way to help their neighborhoods prepare for disasters. So we're creating, hubs within the neighborhoods where that one person steps up to be the leader, to be the one providing information to their neighborhood about being prepared for disasters. So that's one example. A lot of that is happening in the Bay Area, and we're also using that model to, to implement in some of the program that we have. So.
Right, that's great. I've seen examples of that in my own reporting where somebody can actually really save a life if there's a heat wave for an individual who might be isolated on their block or something like that. One question that we have from the audience is from Jasmine, who asks, if there is an Indeed.com style website that looks for volunteers with specific skills for climate change organizations, that would be cool. Do any of you know of any sort of resource like that?
Okay. I was going to say, I don't know of a resource like that. Maybe Britt does. But I would say if you were just like, I think this actually came up in conversations that all three of us had with Laura early on. It said you can literally put interest climate change into your favorite search engine and figure out if there's an activism group nearby that is actually doing that work. And so, for example, I live in Oakland, and in Oakland and Berkeley, there's like a group of enthusiasts who want to teach people how to bike safely through the city. And they hold like Zoom webinars. It's called Walk Bike Oakland or Walk Bike Berkeley, and then they will actually hold your hand like on a Saturday morning and teach you how to bike safely in urban areas. So that's what I'm going to co-opt Laura's thought here for this question.
I wish I could remember the name of this digital platform that these students at Brown University were creating a couple of years ago. I want to see if it's been developed now, but you might be able to find it if you Google around, which was doing exactly this, taking input information about you, what gets you jazzed about life, right, and what you're good at and what you know, and then connecting you with meaningful, impactful things that you can do as an individual. I'll see if I can put it in the show notes later by tracking it down. Also, just want to recommend Climate Twitter. Going on Climate Twitter and asking the community by using a hashtag like, hey, Climate Twitter, something, something, something. You reach out and you can ask questions about the things that move you in this space and get a really nourishing amount of responses that I have found super guiding in my own transition from someone who was not a climate person 5 years ago in my profession to someone who very much is now.
We do have, do you want to add?
No, I was just going to add that there are many organizations who are always looking for volunteers. So just Google organizations. Like, for example, I'm always looking for volunteers. Actera, they run a EV program. They're always looking for ambassadors. So there's a lot of opportunities to volunteer.
Mm-hmm. And then we do have some resources. So with that, along with that handout, virtual handout that we put in the chat, maybe we can put it in again now, that has this Venn diagram on it. It also has a bunch of resources. So let me just point out a few. But there's one that is a search engine for climate jobs called Climate Base. There are like, if you are in the Bay Area, there's an organization called Drawdown Bay Area, which literally lets you look by county at the different organizations that exist if you're looking for something local. And then I think it's important to just also say that you might start somewhere, you might find a place that resonates with you initially, or maybe is like, feels a little bit in the right direction, and you might go there and start, and then you might realize like, okay, I need to find something like this, or you might hear, okay, there's like this whole artist group for climate, and you'll hear about it through there. So just by connecting to one place, even if it's not the perfect fit, it will get you much closer to where you want to be. All right, another question that's coming up from Alexandra is, are there any Bay Area organizations that we can support for tree planting? I feel like you might have some good ideas on this one.
There is quite a few, but the one organization that I work closely with, and we have a project in one of the frontline communities, is Canopy. tree canopy. So that's what they're called. And they are planting trees in East Palo Alto, Bellhaven of Menlo Park, and No Fair Oaks.
In San Francisco, we have Friends of the Urban Forest. Any others that you all want to call out?
I'll just say that I think tree planting is incredibly important and valuable, but I'll reiterate that if you are really hoping to find a mechanism to support basically sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere, one of our best natural tools to do that is in fact wetlands, which have been like 95% of San Francisco Bay Area wetlands have been destroyed since the gold rush. And so supporting organizations that are actually trying to restore them and protect them, like Save the Bay or San Francisco Baykeeper, Baykeeper folks. And then also, there's specifically, I grew up in Fremont, and so Newark was in my backyard, and there's actually Save Newark Wetlands. So that's another organization if your goal is to maximize the amount of carbon sequestration per unit of support that you have to offer.
As a relative newcomer to the Bay, you did it much better than I could.
Okay. All right, great. Here's another great question this is from Gary. What about strategies of mass nonviolent resistance and how tech might help this? Who's got a take on this?
I love this question, Gary. So a couple of things that come to mind. My Climate Journey is a newsletter and podcast run by a guy who's very open about his climate awakening and how he discovered that he needed to usher all of his skills in tech towards the climate crisis. And although it's not necessarily focused on nonviolent resistance per se in the way he's approached it, many people who come to the platform do have those interests and alignments. And he's done this incredible job of producing a nourishing community for lots of people to join on a weekly basis. And now there's tons of people who are thinking, what can I do with my tech background to help out here? And you might want to join and talk to people. They have a Slack community as well, so that it's very dynamic and interpersonal, and look for ways to plug in that way. There's also another Slack universe produced by some technologists at ThoughtWorks, that tech consultancy called Climate and Tech, and they've been running for many years now, doing the same thing. Global community, people out there passionate about the climate crisis, wanting to put their tech skills to use, and so many projects and companies and ways of supporting the social movements and being activists of all stripes have come from there as well. So I would look those up.
Great.
I'll say just two quick things. First is that the latter end of Britt's answer reminded me that if you are a coder and you enjoy doing it, there are a bunch of climate hackathons that I've seen crop up over the years, so that's one way to get involved. And the other thing I'll just say is that I think violence can sometimes be something that is not necessarily directly like witnessable or observable. It can play out in long ways. And so I think about ways that that there are people who are part of our community who are living so like on the fringes, and so they don't have the bandwidth to actually engage in climate action or support themselves in that way. And so I think one way is to lift people up and make sure that they can in fact support themselves so that we have a stronger climate coalition moving forward. And so I think one great way to think about that is supporting this current labor union movement that we have in the country. If you're trying to figure out where some of this is happening, I'm not kidding, this is real. There is a Twitter cat named Jorts who basically amplifies a bunch of union action happening right now and is a great narrator for why things do or don't make sense. And so I think that's another way to get involved.
Okay.
Can I, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, may I just add one little thing? It's great to just reach out to nonviolent activist organizations. Email them, say, hey, I'm really interested. This is what I can do. I'm a tech person. How do I connect? And they will definitely let you know if you're talking, Extinction Rebellion or Sunrise Movement or 350 or something else, right? So really just be friendly. I think that's important.
I want to just ask you all, just for your final thoughts on people who've come here to find out ways to take effective action and the action that will have a really great impact, beyond just recycling more or whatever. What are your wrap-up thoughts, some last things that you might want to add, if you could, in, 15 to 30 seconds?
I would just maybe add, part of my reason to be here is just to voice For the voiceless, there's a lot of communities that are not at the table to plan for climate change. There's a lot of strategies and policies being drawn up, and these communities' priorities, and they are not a focus. And so I urge those who have the voice to please step up and recognize the need to, put in place inclusive strategies and policies to for everyone to support their adaptation journey to face, especially in face of climate change and sea level rise. I know that's more than.
That's great. That's wonderful. Thank you.
My thought is a lot more abstract, but it's that what do you want your world to look like in 10 years? And what is the biggest thing you can do right now that could potentially help make that a reality? And I think that'll be different for each of us, but I want you to really, really cling to that thought about what do you want this world to look like 10 years from now, not what the models say it will. And hopefully that will inspire you to find something to do.
Yeah, and I think it's uncomfortable, but whether we like it or not, what it means to be human has already changed at this time. We are being forced to live through massive disruptions and transformation happening at rapid pace. So we need to probe our inner dimensions in order to figure out how we're going to show up at this time and realize that it's a very special time to be alive and that we all have something vitally, existentially important to do.
Thank you so much. I want to just focus us all again on this Venn diagram. And now that we've heard from our awesome guests, what is it that inspires you? What brings you joy? What are you good at? And what work in the climate world needs doing? So my hope is that over the next weeks and months, maybe even years, you're going to think about where those intersect, and that will be a place for you to do your own work, because this truly is an all hands on deck moment. And as Britt said, it is an amazing time to be alive. It is a terrifying time, but it also means that we have an amazing amount of power in the choices that we make with what we do with our own lives. Once again, I just want to point you to this resources document. I think it'll be really helpful. I'm just going to point out a few of the things so it's accessible really to you. But we've chosen just a few of our favorite things: podcasts, books, newsletters to get started, websites that show you ways to sort of fill in that circle that says what in the world, in the climate world needs doing. Groups that are focused on resilience and adaptation, like Violet's. Groups that help process emotions, ways to have effective climate conversations with your community, your family, climate jobs. Those are just a few of the things, the many things that exist, like on climate Twitter, etc. And finally, I want to end with this concept that has really helped me on my climate journey. It's this idea of active hope. And hope can be a really fraught word when we're talking about climate change, because we're looking at really scary numbers and scary odds. And what hope for some people might mean is just crossing your fingers and going about your daily business. But active hope, which is developed by climate activist Joanna Macy, is this idea that, sort of along the lines of what Priya was just saying, envisioning, knowing the painful reality that exists, and identifying the changes that you want to see in the future that you want to see, and beginning to make them yourself. And so the hope comes from you taking action and from joining together in community of people who are taking action as well. And that is my final thought for the night. I am so grateful that you have all joined us, albeit virtually. And thank you so much to all our wonderful guests and to this wonderful space for being available for our community. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.